Lifelong Republican.
At least I was until Donald Trump came into the picture.
He does not care about you. He does not care about this country.
That Trump doesn't care about the Constitution. He only cares about himself.
Soldiers expect their leaders to be able to do what they do, to be willing to take that risk.
When it came time for him to serve in the Vietnam War, he got 5 deferments.
Coward. We're looking at a lying draft dodger who berates those who serve our country honorably, rewards those who do not, lets them get off scot-free. People that lie to Congress. I mean, what in the hell?
Lots to digest in that ad from a group called Republican Voters Against Trump, and there are a lot of those Republican voters. Here are just a few more of their testimonials.
Back in 2016, you have been hard-pressed to find a bigger Donald Trump supporter than yours truly.
There needed to be some major change.
And along came Donald Trump. It just didn't sound like any politician I'd ever heard before. I thought I'd be a Republican all of my life. But Donald J. Trump has broken my faith in the Republican Party.
I'm tired of being embarrassed.
I have been riddled with guilt.
I am ashamed to this day for voting for him.
We've had enough.
Voting for Donald Trump has been a monumental mistake.
I'll take anybody over him.
I'm voting for Joe Biden.
Joe Biden.
Donald Trump has to go.
It's okay to change your mind. We did.
By the way, kudos to those people for publicly showing that they've changed their mind and doing that all in front of everybody. For more on the ads and the group, and also to get a sense of the mindset of disaffected Republicans, we turn now to Sarah Longwell. She's the co-founder of Republican Voters Against Trump. Sarah, first of all, loving the ads, the messaging and the style, angry Republicans looking right at the camera, explaining how Trump has failed them and the nation. Generally speaking, who are the Republicans pushing away from the president right now, and what's the most common reason that you're hearing as to why Republicans are abandoning Trump?
Yeah, so a lot of the people we're hearing from are people who've been Republicans all their lives, but really think that Donald Trump doesn't reflect their values. And I think for some people, they've been out on Trump for a long time. Even if they voted for him in 2016, just watching him govern was enough for them to be out on him. But then there's a lot of people who've really come in the last 5 or 6 months who've watched him as the health crisis with COVID, the economic crisis, the racial crisis, and they've just seen him not be up to the moment. They've watched him fail as he's, or not even care that much about how to respond to these crises. And so a lot of people say things like, the stakes are just too high now, and he's not up to it.
Is your sense that a lot of these members are going to be ticket splitters, angry with Trump but still willing to vote Republican down the line? Or do they, like others, find the GOP complicit at this point, supporting Trump, failing to keep him in check, and of course, not doing anything on impeachment?
Yeah, so we have hundreds and hundreds of people who are part of our program. And so people have different things that they say. I think there are some people who, will not vote for Donald Trump, will vote for Joe Biden, but might also vote for Tom Tillis. Those people are definitely part of the people we're seeing. But there's a lot of other people who just feel like the Republican Party no longer reflects the party that they felt like they knew. And so for a lot of people, they talk about having left the Republican Party, and there's a lot of statistics that bear this out, that show that Donald Trump has actually really reduced the number of people who identify themselves as Republicans. And it is especially prominent among women. I think that I hear this from women in focus groups all the time who just say that Donald Trump is anathema to what they think is right, the way that they think somebody should behave, the way that they think a leader should comport himself. And so I think that while some people very much own and continue to own their Republican identity, but just cannot support Trump, there's other people for whom Trump has exposed maybe just a break with the party, because so many of the people who are in the party, the elected officials, have done nothing but go along with Trump and sort of be complicit in what he's doing. And I think there's a lot of voters who have just decided they're out completely.
In 2016, a lot of voters, Republicans included, felt like they really had nowhere to go. Trump had high negatives, but so did Hillary Clinton. Joe Biden's negatives are nowhere near Trump's, but we can already see the campaign working to try to tarnish him. I'm curious among your members if you think that will work, if we get headlines about Hunter Biden or more investigations or whatever, just to try to scaring the suburbs, Biden's a slave to AOC, or you think that's factored in for a lot of people at this point, that Trump is going to make whoever his opponent is look as bad as possible?
Yeah, I think for the people who are participating in our program, they say things like, I'd vote for a tuna fish sandwich over Donald Trump. I'd vote for a tomato can over Donald Trump. Those are direct quotes from some of the people who've made videos for us. Now, we have hundreds and hundreds of testimonials from these Republican voters, these Trump voters, who are definitely going to vote for Joe Biden in 2020. But that's a different subset maybe than the people who don't know what they're going to do yet. And I think there's people who think, there's nobody persuadable left. That is not true. I just did a focus group last week in which, of the 8 people who were in it, there was one who was definitely still voting for Trump, one who was definitely voting for Biden, and the rest were totally undecided. And they were all Trump voters in 2016. And so what we're doing is using these testimonials and these stories from these Republican voters, and we're trying to get them in front of these soft Trump supporters who aren't quite sure what they're going to do.
I'm glad you brought that up because I saw some polling numbers that confused me, and I was going to ask you to clarify. 20% of Republicans, only 20% of Republicans say they're happy with the direction of the country right now, yet 91% of Republicans say they still approve of Trump's job performance. Do you think that's the tribal nature of the GOP right now, or do you think there might be another explanation for it?
Well, look, I don't think that Trump's that 91% number is still true. I think that number has really diminished over the past 6 months. I think it's now, I've seen numbers that are closer to 87% support, and in some places lower. So he is actually slipping among Republicans. But look, I do think it's tribal. Politics often is. And so there are people who are basically always going to vote for Republican. There are people who are always going to vote Democrat. And then there's sort of what I would call the right-leaning independents, right? So the independents broke hard against Hillary Clinton in 2016. It was decisive. And so in 2020, and you mentioned Joe Biden's negatives not being so high, what he's really picking up is a lot of these right-leaning independents who voted for Mitt Romney or voted for John McCain. They're saying, hey, Biden's okay with me. I'm fine to vote for him, even though I'm typically a Republican voter. But being a Republican voter is different from being sort of a tribal Republican. There is sort of a distinction there. And again, that high approval rating, even though I think it's a little bit lower than what you cited, that is among a shrinking pool of people who used to identify as Republicans, but now identify as independents, or in some cases, even Democrats. Take a look at California. In California, Republicans are now the 3rd largest political party behind Democrats and then independents.
Sarah, I know there are a lot of Republicans and a lot of people outside of the party as well who are, to some measure, hoping that the party gets routed in November so that the GOP can abandon the cult of Trump and try to emerge as a more electable party. But I think back to a piece that I read in The Nation by Damon Linkler, who argued that still might not happen. He says the Republican problem no one knows how to solve. And he says that problem are Republican voters themselves. He argues that Trump is a result of a Republican pattern going from Sarah Palin through Herman Cain, Michelle Bachmann, Ben Carson, Rick Santorum, and then Trump, who aren't really bringing that much to the table, but anger in a lot of ways. And he says that a lot of these voters are undaunted in their conviction that politics is primarily about the venting of grievances and the trolling of opponents. And he writes, the dumber and angrier and more shameless, the better. And he looks at the number of Republicans not wearing masks, considering all the scientific advice, as part of the rationale for that. This may be a bit of a chicken and egg question, Sarah, but is it the leaders of the party who are responsible for changing the message, or do the members have to change the elected officials? How does that evolution of the party happen?
Yeah, this is such a big and complicated question. I'll say that, of course, it is to some degree about the voters and what the voters will tolerate. Going back to Sarah Palin, there's always been a strain of sort of populist nationalism within the Republican Party, but it wasn't the dominant strain. It was kind of a recessive gene. What's happened is that recessive gene has now become the dominant gene, and it really is controlling the party. And that is a problem, as Damon Linker notes, for the long-term, prospects of the party. I do think, though, that there is real merit to this idea that if Joe Biden demolishes Donald Trump, right, if he wins in a landslide, and white men are not growth stock when it comes to building a governing political coalition, right? You need to make a much bigger tent if you want power, especially if you want federal power and you want to win elections. And so if the Republicans get beaten badly, they lose the Senate. The fact is, there will be incentives for them to figure out, how do we win women back? How do we win the suburbs back? how do we make a bigger appeal to minorities who don't vote for us at all? At some point, they will have to grapple with those questions if they're going to be electable. And so I do think that it's important. That's why this election is so important. It's why Joe Biden needs to win by such a landslide, because that is the only chance we have for the Republican Party to go into the wilderness, do some reflecting, and figure out how to be a broader national coalition that appeals to people beyond sort of this core base of Trump voters.
Will be fascinating to see what the GOP's step 2 is, assuming that we actually see the step 1 that we are all anticipating. Sarah Longwell is the co-founder of Republican Voters Against Trump. Sarah, really appreciate a few minutes. Thanks.
Thanks so much for having me.
And up next, we'll pivot to COVID and some disturbing new numbers about children that show just how dangerous it could be to reopen the schools to kids as well as to their teachers.